Hey, how's it going everyone? This is YLAM here. In today's Fuji Friday, we definitely have a lot to discuss, primarily the GFX100 and its announcements. But before we actually get into that, there are two other camera bodies that I really want to talk about. So let's get into those and then we can get into the main topic. The first one that I want to talk about is the X-Pro3, and there should be an announcement for the X-Pro3 coming in October of this year. That's really great news for the people that love that type of camera body, because if they're announcing in October, there's a really good chance that that camera body might be coming out this year, because roughly speaking, every single time they do an announcement for a camera body, generally about 3 to 4 weeks later, the camera body does get released. So if you think about October, then going into November, which is the holiday season, that's kind of the perfect time to get a new camera body out there, because people are going to be buying stuff. And we know photographers have been waiting on this camera body for quite a while now. I really hope it has in-body stabilization, because that would be a great advantage for photographers, but we really don't know anything about the specs right now. So hopefully in October we will get a lot more details, or at least some leaked rumors before October. But for anybody who's looking forward to the X-Pro3, I think you have something to look forward to for this year. There is a rumor going around in 2020 that the X-H2 might not even come out. Now there's two ways to look at that. You can be the glass half empty type of person saying that, well, the camera body didn't sell very well, therefore they could be canceling or thinking about canceling it. And that opinion does have a lot of merit. The reason why I say this was because this was built as the professional camera body, but let's face it, the X-T3 definitely surpassed it. It won so many more awards than the X-H1, and that's become a really big problem. In fact, the X-T3 is priced higher than the X-H1 because of the technology gap there is there. I've talked to a lot of professionals. While they do love the X-H1, the X-T3 just offers too much more for the X-H1s to be their primary bodies. It's one of those things where in-body stabilization is amazing and it's great, but for most professionals, the in-body stabilization, all that really provides is an extra buffer of protections to get sharper images or better video. We just have a smaller margin of error, while having in-body stabilizations give us a larger margin of error. So if you're the glass half empty type of person, that's what I would say. A glass half full type of person, what I would say is that they're going to make that camera body better. So they're going to actually fit it in line with the next generation of technology instead of putting in just the X-T3's technology. That is what I would expect. So the X-H2 would have the same technology that's going into the X-T4 or the X-T40. So whenever that camera body comes out, it's going to be the next technological leap for photography and for video. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the main topic, which is the GFX100. I'm sure if you're a Fujifilm enthusiast, you've already watched the videos on YouTube. So I'm not going to do anything related towards what people have already said. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ingest that information and I'm going to give you my philosophy and my interpretations of what Fujifilm is trying to do. First thing I really want to talk about is how cameras have become content creating devices. I've already talked about that on Photo Tuesday. I'm just going to bring it into this video and kind of just expand upon it a little bit more. I believe the future of cameras is going to be about content creation. It doesn't matter if it's stills or video. In other words, it could be a still picture, it could be time-lapse, HDR, slow motion, regular video. All of that stuff is content creation. That is what the new generation understands and knows. Our generation, when we grew up, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have the internet and smartphone technology and all of this stuff that the new kids are growing up with. So my view of the world is that I don't believe any camera manufacturer that's only going to focus in on one niche is going to survive, because the next generations of users is going to expect to have all of these features inside their camera bodies. Now that we're done talking about the other two camera bodies, let's go ahead and discuss the GFX100. In my opinion, this is Fujifilm's second try in trying to create a professional camera for the professional market. The X-H1 was definitely their first attempt and it kind of fell flat on its face. You can kind of see it from the demographic of professional photographers picking the X-T3 over the X-H1. We won't rehash all of that information again, but I do think that Fujifilm really wants to put a foothold into the professional market, and the GFX100 is their second attempt. And I think this one's going to be significantly more successful, because I do think a subset subset of the professional market is always looking for the next best thing, and Fujifilm is kind of providing that with this large format GFX100. As long as they can prove that the autofocus tracking can compete with full frame, they're definitely going to have a foothold in product photography and also modeling, because this camera is kind of built for scenarios like that. But they really put it into a rugged body in which this camera is meant to be used in the outdoors. So for me, it'll be really interesting to see what type of professionals are going to try to take on this camera and try to adapt it to the type of photography that they're taking. This is definitely the reason why the GFX line has the professional grade customer service that we're seeing from them. I personally wouldn't doubt it if they gave up on APS-C for professionals and just went straight with the GFX100, but only time will tell on that. Now let's go ahead and talk about that 100 megapixels and also a feature that they actually put in and promoted, which is the skin smoothing feature. And I find this very funny because here's my interpretations of that, which is we're getting to such a high megapixel right now that when you actually take a portrait photography of somebody, we're no longer highlighting their beauty, we're actually highlighting their imperfections. Let's face it, if you take a picture of me with a 100 megapixel camera, it's not going to look very good. I am not a model. If you were to use that 100 megapixels on a supermodel or a model, it'd be perfectly fine because they're going to have perfect skin, perfect hair, yada yada. You know what I'm talking about. That's a great camera for them. But if you're going to be a working professional taking portraits of normal people, at this point there could be too much detail. And this is just my opinion, but this skin smoothing feature, having that in the camera already, that kind of highlights the fact that there can be more detail than what you really want when you're actually taking a picture, especially of people. So that's my interpretations of the skin smoothing features. I would really love to know what you guys think. If you're a working professional, do you think 100 megapixels is pretty much over the top, and at that point there's just too much detail and you really don't need it? But the cynic in me is taking over when it comes to these type of features and 100 megapixels. The next topic to talk about is large format versus full frame. Traditionally, when you compared full frame to medium format, the medium format loses handedly and the full frame people tout their superiority. But with this GFX coming out right now, really full frame is going to be on the losing end of that pretty soon. And pretty soon full frame people are going to start saying, hey, you shouldn't compare full frame to large format because now they're going to be on the losing side. So that is something, if you are a working professional, you really need to keep an eye on, because what that says is the bar for the most professional type of imagery has just gone up a notch, and you might actually have to go up that rung if you want to get certain types of jobs. Because like what I've said in other videos, all of these barriers to medium format in the digital worlds, they really don't exist because it's a technology problems, and we can always solve technology problems. And you're seeing that in the GFX100, which is only a second generation camera. Can you imagine what we're going to see in 3 or 4 generation cameras? Because it's just going to improve. In other words, the advantages of full frame, it's starting to really slim down and super quickly. So as a working professional, you really need to sit down and see when is the time that you might have to upgrade to large format, because it's going to become the new benchmark. Now, if we apply that 100 megapixel camera to landscapes, product photography, basically taking pictures of any sort of objects, I think it's really going to excel at that, because the level of detail you're going to get is going to be super amazing, especially landscapes when you can really get that texture. But the interesting thing to look out for me is, our professional landscape photographers going to abandon their full frame cameras and buy into the GFX line for their landscape photography? It is a heavy setup, it's expensive. Are they going to find value in this type of camera to take over the landscape photography? That will definitely be an interesting thing to look out for. But as a person who likes landscape photography or taking pictures of objects, this would definitely be a very interesting camera to use. But I will admit it, for what I do, it's definitely overkill. Okay, I know this video is getting a little bit long, so let's end the discussion with the video features that are coming with the GFX100. And from what I've seen on YouTube, which isn't the greatest benchmark, I know, but the imagery coming out of it is really nice. It's really smooth. I think Fujifilm has nailed it for the first generation of large format video. And we're already seeing some amazing videos, some really good autofocus, and also some really amazing IBIS when they're actually moving moving around. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more information come out about that. And I know there's going to be plenty of YouTube channels that are going to be flushing it out. One thing that we always talk about here on YouTube is the full frame look when we're actually recording with full frame cameras, and that's why people don't like APS-C. Now we're moving up to larger format. So is there a large format look? I personally think there is, but in my opinion, it's actually very subtle. I don't think it's actually this huge jump that I was expecting. There is definitely a really nice look to it. A lot of it has to do with Fujifilm's film simulation and their lenses, but I really do like the look. There's definitely a really nice look to this large format video, but we really need to see more before we can really say, is the large format look going to be the next big thing? Now, having said all of that, what does large format look mean? Because a lot of people say it, but nobody really gives a definition on it. So I'm going to give you my definition. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just my personal definition. But there's two things that I look for when it comes to the format look. So APS-C look, full frame look, large format look, whatever look. And those two things are, for me, is the ability of the sensor to work in low light situations and the foreground and background depth of field, which a lot of people equate to bokeh, but that's not really what I'm talking about for video. What I'm really saying here is the foreground element, which is me blending really well with the background element. In other words, it's not distracting to the eyes. Take, for example, this video right here. I'm kind of skirting the line between having too much foreground background separation. In other words, I am really sharp, but the background is really out of focus. I pop quite a bit, but that's not really what's important. What's really important in this video is what's coming out of my mouth, which is the audio. So in other words, my image, my visual sharpness of my image should not be distracting to the point where you're not listening to my voice. There is a lot of full frame and lens combos where the image is actually so distracting that it detracts from the audio that's coming out, which is what's important. And for cinematography and even here on YouTube, that's really important. If your video is so distracting that people aren't listening to your voice, then it really doesn't help you and you shouldn't use that lens combo. I've seen plenty of examples on YouTube where that is so distracting that I actually don't like the videos, even though the content on there is really important. It's one of those things where that balance is super important, and once that balance gets out of whack, it just doesn't really work. But from the videos that I do see online, there definitely looks to be a nice blend of that, and I really like the look. And really, that's all I can say about that, because we have such a small sampling of it, which, let's admit it, that's a very high polished subsampling of that. We really need to see this camera in the hands of content creators to see if large format look is really going to catch on. And this leads me to the last subject, which are my gripes. And the first and foremost, and I have the same gripe for APS-C, which is we don't see any video lenses. In other words, we're getting all of these great video specs, but we have no lenses to go along with it. These are all photography lenses on a camera body that's super capable of doing video. We know there are some for the high end, but we really need some for the mid-range or the low end, depending on how you want to look at it. But that's something that we're missing now in large format, and we're also missing in the APS-C world. Why are we not seeing that on the roadmap? This is something that's super important if you're going to put all of these great specs into the camera bodies. Now, if you were to ask me what lenses that I would love to see on the roadmap just as a beginning, I would love to see a 24, a 50, and an 85 prime lens with a declicked aperture, super smooth autofocus that's very quiet, and hopefully some sort of teleconverter. Not really a teleconverter, but think of a teleconverter that acts as an ND filter. In other words, you can just fit it right into the camera body, and you can just slide in a circular polarizer or a variable ND and then put your lens right in front of it. Just having those three primes would solve so many problems for video people. We just need a declicked aperture, and we would love to see autofocus, because you've put so much effort into creating great autofocus, but we have no cinema glass that actually has great autofocus. In my opinion, it's kind of silly, and it's high time they start putting some of that glass into the roadmap so that we can actually take advantage of all these great video features. Another thing that you see on this camera is that it doesn't have a flip out screen, which I'm perfectly fine with. This camera is massive. It's not a vlogging camera, so not having a flip out screen, I'm perfectly fine with that. The other gripe that I have is that we don't have SSD support right out of the camera. This camera is going to generate humongous files. Being able to plug in an SSD and dumping all those images into a terabyte SSD that's really affordable, that's something that I would love to see, and I hope it gets implemented into this camera. So that was all of my opinions. I know it's a really long video, but there's definitely a lot to talk about, and I look forward to seeing more content on the GFX100. I've actually already started saving money for this camera. It's probably going to take me 2.5 to 3 years to save up for this camera, but I'm okay with doing that. You'll notice that on this channel I haven't really bought any of the new lenses that came out. That's because I'm taking that money and I'm saving it for this GFX100. I know I'm not going to be buying it new because there's no reason for me to buy it new. I'm hoping in 2 to 3 years time period they're going to have a Mark II out. The first GFX100 will drop in price a little bit and I can pick up a used one at a very good price, but I'm definitely interested in getting this camera, but it's just going to take a little bit of time saving up that money. Anyhow, that's all I have this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.